Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, and morning potentially on where you are. And welcome to episode 10 of the Center of Health Technology and Innovation webinar series, From Idea to Impact: How Clinicians Are Shaping the Future of Health Innovation. I'm Jamie Edwards, President and Chief Strategy Officer at Kieran's Health. And for the next hour, your friendly tour guide through the brave new world where stethoscopes meet Series A term sheets. Today's guests have all traded white coats for the white hot glow of startup life. Between them, they've logged thousands of OR hours, raised hundreds of millions in capital, and survived more board meetings and residency call nights. So expect stories that are equal parts pulse pounding and also pulse lowering. Here's our flight plan. We're going to go on, do a round of intros, a candid conversation on leaping from clinic to C-suite, and live Q&A after that. So feel free to drop those questions into the Q&A section. So buckle up, silence those notification pagers and phones, and let's explore how these doctor-preneurs are prescribing the next generation of health innovation. Why don't we go around and do a round of intros? Maybe Kathy, we could start with you.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you for, ladies first. I always enjoy that. I'm Dr. Kathy Magliato. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon here in Los Angeles, and I specialize in heart and lung transplantation and artificial heart technology and ventricular assist devices. I also have an MBA from UCLA Anderson, and I've been a 20-year volunteer for AHA, and including being the past president of both the LA County Board and the Western State Regional Board. But I'm really here today in my capacity as a founder, CEO, and CMO of a medical device company, which is called Cordex Systems. And so essentially what we've done at Cordex is to take the most commonly used tool in healthcare, a tool that we've had since 1881, which is an ordinary blood pressure cuff. And no one's ever really thought to repurpose that. So we have a proprietary mathematical algorithm that can take an ordinary blood pressure cuff and turn it into a linear sensor that can biohack a human pulse at about 200 data points per second to create what I consider to be the most important metric of vascular health, which is endothelial function. And I know James in particular, you're no stranger to inflammation and its role in endothelial health. And so, this metric we've known about for over 100 years. We've just never had a simple, easy, point of care test to be able to measure it. It's linked to every risk factor for heart disease and is an independent predictor of MACE. And what's exciting now for Cordex is that it's more recently been known to improve with GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Zepbound. So how cool is it that we have $100 billion, drug out there for diabetes and weight loss, and I potentially have a way to measure the vascular efficacy of that drug. And so that's essentially what we're doing at Cordex Systems. And thank you so much, Jamie and the AHA, for inviting me.
Kathy, pretty amazing to think about, the nature of the history of your technology and how you're taking something old and making it new again, right? From the standpoint of a real innovation. David, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Dr. David Albert, and I'm the founder and chief medical officer of a company called AliveCor. Many people know us by our product, Cardia Mobile. They may have seen ads on TV. We've sold 5 million Cardia devices, have literally 1 million active users, and it's a personal ECG rhythm monitoring device. We've continued to innovate that. We can give you half of the 12-lead ECG in our Cardia 6L. And now we have a Cardia 12L, which is a pocketable smartphone connected 12-lead. So we're moving into areas like diagnosing acute coronary syndrome. And so we continue to innovate because, our competition are little companies, Apple, Google, Samsung. So, I guess we're no longer a startup, but we certainly are at the scale of our competitors.
Amazing technology, David. We look forward to learning more about it on this call. But no, I don't think people conceived of a couple of years ago being able to carry a 12-lead around in your pocket, right? So an amazing advancement. Jim, let's go to you. The floor is yours.
Great. So my name is Jim Min. I'm a cardiologist. I did my postgraduate training at the University of Chicago, and then wound up taking a job in New York City in 2005 at Cornell Medical College and New York Presbyterian Hospital. My background is really mostly in a focus on coronary artery disease, the cause of heart attacks. And so we leveraged imaging and prevention programs to try to deliver better care. We ended up sort of coming up with the realization that heart doctors never measured heart disease when it came to coronary heart disease, that we were quite good at the upstream surrogate markers like cholesterol and blood pressure and so on. And we were really good at sort of the downstream sequela like stenoses and ischemia, but we'd never measured the actual heart disease at scale, which is the atherosclerosis. So we ended up focusing on that, on a lot of large scale trials, implemented that into a prevention program, found we could really personalize somebody's treatment and tracking of disease. And it was a very manual process. And so about 8 years ago, we started a company called Cleerly to try to deliver a care management pathway for standardized, comprehensive evaluation, education, treatment, and tracking of heart disease. So that's who we are today.
Thank you, Jim. By the way, for everyone on the call, it was pretty amazing to be on the pre-call and hear these three innovators start collaborating with each other like on the call. So what the American Heart Association has done at the Center for Health Technology Innovation was bring people like this together for this exact purpose. But it was great to hear the conversation pre-call and how you guys are talking about potentially working together. Let's start off again with some, we were talking about chivalry's not dead. Kathy, we want to start with you again. What advice would you
Maybe you're
give
picking on me now. No.
Yeah, no. Well, I promise. Last time we're going to go first on this one. What
Yeah.
advice would you give your younger self when you just came out of residency, knowing what you know now?
Oh gosh. So many things, but honestly, Jamie, what really comes to mind is something I call dwelling in the house of yes. Okay, so you can imagine as a female heart surgeon, all I ever heard was no, right? No, you can't be a heart surgeon. No women, there are no women, heart surgeons. You should go into OBGYN or plastic surgery. And I guess I probably would have made more money in plastics now that I think about it. But no, you can't go get an MBA in the middle of, being a heart surgeon. There's nothing about the aorta on the microeconomics exam. And sure enough, they were right. No, you can't have, kids in the middle of, being a full-fledged heart surgeon. And you just have to stand a little farther from the table when you're pregnant. So like all I ever got was no, 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 no. And if I had a dime for every time someone told me that, I'd be, a pretty rich person and not have to maybe even do this. But what I found is, and the advice I'd give is to what I call dwell in the house of yes. And that is, be around people who tell you yes. Because, and I'm sure David and James can appreciate this, the people that tell you no, you can't do something, those are the soul killers, right? The soul crushers. And so I would advise all of you out there listening on our webinar to find the people who support you, find the people who tell you, yes, you can do it, and then you will truly achieve every success that you're trying to achieve in your life. So that would be my best advice.
Jim, what about you? Making this transition from, doctor to innovator. A lot of physicians may potentially be fine just continuing to go on their path from, residency to fellowship to practice. But you decided to take this extra step. Like, what advice, knowing what you know now, would you have given your younger self, knowing that you were going to pursue this path?
It's a good question. Like, I think the advice would be do the same thing, like which was concentrate on cardiology. Like that, when I was training to be a cardiologist and wanted to take that seriously. So, studied hard, learned a lot. I think if you try to shortcut steps, it never works out. So I think when you're in a certain state, work on that state. My transition out of academic medicine into industry was just sort of a next requisite step. Like we realized we couldn't do it in academics. And if we wanted to continue to pursue our mission, we'd have to naturally evolve into a non-academic space. But if I had to do it over again, I would have just concentrated on being the best cardiologist that I could be.
So just continuing to follow the passion of what you wanted to do from the beginning and taking it to its next logical kind of fruition.
Yeah, if you have a mission in mind and like a North Star, like you got to get there. That path was going to take you sometimes to the left and sometimes to the right, but it's the North Star that guides you. And to me, that's a clinical question that you want to answer and solve and address. And for me, again, that next step happened to be leaving academics and going into industry, but the North Star never changed. It was always rooted in a clinical principle.
Mhm.
I love that. David, there's a point in time in which you've been trained for something. Doctors go through a large amount of training. There's a huge amount of commitment to get through medical school and residency and those types of things. And when you choose this innovation path, a lot of times you need to decide, well, I've been trained for this, but now my future path means hanging up my white coat and putting on a suit, right? Or in your case, a bow tie. But I'm sure you probably wear your bow tie wherever you were.
And
But
I'm
from
not a
that standpoint,
pediatrician.
there you go. There you go. That's right. No funny things in your pocket to make the kids laugh, right? Um,
He does
take
have
us
a
back to
clown nose,
that.
though. I can verify that.
Yeah, yeah. Take us back to that day where you said, "This is what I want to do. I want to be on the innovation
And
side, and I'm going to be hanging up my
act,
doctor's coat."
yeah, it's an interesting story, but I want to echo what both Kathy and Jim said. And that is, Kathy said, find yes. Because if you are going to leave what everyone considers a career in medicine to jump off into a risky venture,
Mhm.
you better believe that yes, you will succeed, and don't accept the no's. And you better have a mission, as Jim said. There's a goal. I'm going there, and I'm going to achieve that. So I echo both of them. Now, I was a little different. I was both in engineering, biomedical engineering graduate school and medical school at Duke. I had already invented and sold an invention. So when my classmates were eating ramen noodles, I was driving a Corvette I'd bought myself. Okay, and I have 90 patents now, and I've started 4 companies. And when I left, I left medicine because somebody didn't want to buy my next invention. Nobody wanted to license it. And I was like, this is the best idea I've had yet. So I went to my wife and my dad and I said, I'm going to leave medicine and start a company. I knew nothing about business, zero. Um, and they thought I was crazy because this was 1987. Okay, this is not today when that's far more
Been on
normal.
this journey for a while.
It was, yeah, no doubt about it. It was the 4th company. I mean, I sold my last company to GE. I was the chief scientist of GE Cardiology. Uh, I remember when we had Imatron, James. I don't know if you remember
Oh
Imatron. It was
yeah.
the fast CT scanner for cardiac scanning. So I would just tell you, yeah, I met Matt Budoff 20 plus years ago. Is that I had a goal. I wanted to bring this thing to fruition. And once I got in it, I probably should have failed multiple times. Oh, I've, a lot of little failures, but always kept the goal in mind and successes. And I can tell you that uh, my mentors, the chief of cardiology, University of Oklahoma, the late Dr. Ralph Lazera, my mentor at Duke, the late Dr. Galen Wagner. I know I'm old because all my mentors are dead. Okay. But both of them said to my dad and my wife, it's okay. Dave will just come back and be cardiologist. So if this fails, well, that's, almost 40 years ago. And
So, David, did that feel like a risk to you?
I was too stupid to know it was a risk. I didn't know anything about business. And I'm going to get into that because I'm not the CEO, because I found out long ago that what I like to do is invent new things and go clinically validate them. So I run clinical trials. I still, go give grand rounds at places like Mayo and Cleveland Clinic, but uh, I don't worry about HR. I don't worry about marketing. I don't worry about finance. Uh, and so, because those are not my skills, I didn't go get an MBA. I should have. That's probably the biggest weakness, was that I didn't have an MBA. But, it was a risk. I just was too stupid to recognize it, Jamie.
Jim, what was the moment for you where you actually, I think what David really spoke about was this belief in himself and also maybe the naivete that it takes to like realize that you don't know what you're about to get into. But for you, Jim, like where was that moment where you said, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life?
I think it was in academics. Like, when we were doing all of the large scale clinical trials that we did, we learned a lot from that. And those learnings is great. It's knowledge. We had a very generous philanthropic donor, and so we had the luxury of having a lot of resources. And I remember him asking us one time, he's like, "Well, when does this stuff get to humans?" I thought, well, it never gets to humans, really. We just write papers and grants and give presentations. And that was sort of the moment I realized, like, if you want to make this thing real, like you got to go out and do it. So that was sort of the nidus of why it ended up in industry rather than academics, to just create a scalable solution that could help people in mass rather than one-on-one in the office. To Dave's like point, like, yeah, there's a lot of learning that needs to happen. You know, people used to say like, "Oh yeah, you're not in the real world. You're in these ivory towers." I'm like, "No, I'm in the real world." You get out, the real world's very different, right? There's no
Yeah.
net. Like you jump and there's no net. You can't make payroll at the end of the month, and you're going to have to furlough people or fire them. And I didn't realize that. Like you think like, well, maybe they can just take a couple days off. No, they can't. Like, I mean, there's a lot in terms of building a business, and I think it's around setting the vision, setting the culture, and learning as rapidly as you can, and surrounding yourself with amazing people and leaving them alone to let them lead. So
That's
um,
critical.
yeah.
Yeah, I heard that through David, what you were saying as well was like knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and then bringing in the people to fill the gaps. Jim, was there like a family discussion that happened where you're like, this is the decision that I'm making? And sometimes, as founders and entrepreneurs, like our decisions don't just impact us and what we want to do career-wise, right? There's a broader scope. Was there any of that occurred?
Uh, Probably not. Like, I mean, I think it was just the natural next step was like, if we're going to deliver this to human beings in a way that can actually meaningfully impact heart health, we got to go to this next step. And the next step seems pretty clear at the time. There are a lot of unknowns like that we didn't know, like whether or not we're going to make it or whether or not we're going to survive as a company, like whether we could raise financing to actually fund the company, whether or not people would actually want the product that we thought was that important, and so on and so on. But the frame shift in my mind was like from that, pure science to, okay, how do you delight the clients, right? Like how do you delight the doctors so that you offer them something that is valuable to them, that is a workflow that's seamless to them, that's comprehensive, that is actionable clinically. And but there wasn't a whole lot of discussion because it just seemed like the natural next step.
Kathy, Jim just really talked about something that I think is really important, which is this mindset shift that occurs. When did it happen for you? Medicine trains doctors to minimize risk,
Right.
and having a startup requires you betting on risk and being all in. When did that mindset shift happen for you?
Yeah, and I don't know that we like bet on risk per se, but I think just innately as a surgeon, um, people don't realize this, but when we're, scrubbing our hands at the scrub sink, most people think, oh, we're thinking about success, right? We're thinking about how are we going to succeed in this operation and not leave the room with a patient in a body bag, right? Because that's what the stakes are in an OR. And in fact, it's actually the antithesis of that. Like we're at the scrub sink thinking about one thing and one thing only, and that is failure, right? So we're at the scrub sink in our minds, moving through, thousands of steps in an operation and looking at where is the risk? Where am I going to fail, right? Because again, for us, failure is death, right? So I think that as clinicians, and again, I'm just speaking as a surgeon, but as clinicians, I think we are innately trained to mitigate risk. And that is critical with a startup because there are so many potential points of failure. So, being an entrepreneur, I say, is like getting out of bed and pushing a rock up a hill, right? Every day, same rock, same hill, and avoiding all those pitfalls. And I think we're trained to do that. So I literally get up every day and figure out, okay, how is my company going to fail today? And then I just mitigate that risk. And I think that has served me well, especially given the number of, companies that don't make it all the way to commercialization because we're not commercialized yet.
So David, let's double click on that for a second. So we're used to seeking data and minimizing risk, but at what point, we always know that our product may not be perfect when it gets into market. You've done this over 4 companies. Um, when do you stop seeking data and realize that you're ready to ship? Like when do you have the confidence to push the button?
Well, first of all, in any of our domains, we have some hurdles that you have to go through. The Food and Drug Administration in the United States, CE mark, notified bodies, regulatory around the world. And then you have the notion of clinical acceptance. That requires peer-reviewed publications, presentations at major meetings, data that is prospective and strong, with p-values hopefully far below 0.05. And so you have to at least jump those barriers, even if you don't have what you believe to be the ultimate product, in order to be able to ship. And so I think, there is in medical device world, including software as a service like Jim, or a new methodology, a new way of evaluating vascular health, Kathy, personal ECG devices. I can tell you in 2010, people thought I was crazy. My friends at GE Healthcare thought, nah, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
So they've changed their mind subsequently. 5 million devices and a stark impact of having the world's biggest company at the time. Today, NVIDIA at $4 trillion valuation, but at the time, Apple come in to compete against us, validated the market. Because all of these markets are not validated. I mean, Jim has a great technology. Kathy is obviously has very interesting technology for evaluating vascular health. But when you start, you don't have validation yet, at least not firm. And so there is a leap. Once you get past the FDA, there's a leap as, do I have that MVP? Okay, minimum viable product, not most valuable player. And so that's what you're looking for. You're looking for clearance and at least minimum viable product, which includes the regulatory and the clinical validation.
And Jim, what about for you coming from academia, where you were talking about the research papers and doing that type of work? When it came time to actually roll your care plans out, how did you know they were ready?
Yeah, it's a great question. We had done research, and our chief medical and scientific officer is a gentleman named Udo Hoffman, who was sort of my counterpart. I was at Cornell, he was at Mass General. He did very similar things. He had a computational biology program, ran a lot of clinical trials and so on. And so we both sort of looked at each other and thought, like, hey, we've done research for so many years that people just sort of believe that the products work. That's just not true. Like, nobody's going to believe it. So, many years ago, we invested a lot in clinical validation. So, we, for diagnostic accuracy validation, demonstrating that our stuff actually means something through large-scale observational cohort studies, randomized controlled trials. Like, I think in the field of cardiovascular medicine can be proud to say that, like, we are the most evidence-based field in medicine, and that is due to the reliance on the mechanism of the randomized controlled trial. So we invested heavily in that too. We've been extremely fortunate to be supported by some very sort of long-only visionary investors who believe that the only way that we're going to change the standard of care is through clinical evidence. So, I mean, we invest very, very heavily on that, and we will always continue to do that. I think that's the DNA that sort of drives us, is the science and the clinical evidence, and that it can actually impact somebody's life. So that's probably how I ended up doing that.
Jim,
Yeah.
do you feel like because you were a doctor, I think sometimes people start companies and they may not have the clinical expertise sitting around the table that the three of you obviously have in terms of how to navigate the clinical environment and how to test out their theories or test out a product or build the engagement plans based on the data and then test them. If you were not a doctor, do you feel like your path would have been harder? Or do you feel like, or what advice would you give in terms of navigating to get to this point of clinical rigor and confidence?
I think you need I think that the doctor-preneurs, the word that you used earlier, like we get, and I think this is common in many, many startups, but you fall in love with your product, and that's not, a product is not a business, right? Like, you can have the best product in the world and have a really crummy business, and you can have a pretty lackluster product and make a great business out of it. They're not necessarily interlinked. One would think that if you've got best in class product, you can always make a business out of it, and that's just, it's not true. So I think thinking, parallel, you want to solve the clinical problem with the best product or the best solution, but you also want to build the best business that you can, and that is a whole different set of exercises. I mean, I don't know if you watch Shark Tank, but Mr. Wonderful one time said, like, there was a startup that was giving, like, I think they sold socks or something, but they would give a pair of socks away every time they sold a pair of socks, but they weren't profitable yet. And he said, that's a horrible idea. He's like, the number one job of a business is to make money. Like, because without that money, you have a dead business and you can't deliver on your mission. I think as academic physicians, like, that's a little off-putting, right? Like, you don't want to think about the money, you want to think about the clinical problem. But I think the inverse corollary of that is true too, that if you understand the clinical mission, you can always figure out a way to monetize it and make a business out of it if you're doing the right thing for the patient. And so I know that there are a couple of themes there, but I think those are the things that sort of intermeshed on a Venn diagram to help guide at least us on, where the clinical aspects were important, how that influenced the product, how that influenced the clinical evidence and the randomized control trials that we're doing. But also the flip side of that coin is that we need to create a solid business on a rock solid foundation that can grow and scale.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that you just made, which is, important for everyone to understand that there's a lot of great technologies that could really help people and a lot of great solutions that people have created, but they never found product market fit, or they never thought about, at first how someone's got to pay for this. And that's a really important thing to think about as you're building a business, because at the end of the day, that's going to be the business's lifeblood and what's going to make it sustainable. So I love that point. You know, Kathy, I gotta ask, like, what to you is harder? Was it, those residency call nights, or was it,
Yeah.
building out that first product team? Like those challenges that might be like, oh, I knew I was getting into this, but when I got into the business world, I didn't understand what that was going to be like. Like, what was more difficult for you?
Yeah, well, I probably would have to say the nights on call, the first call nights. But again, it's funny. It's a great question because seriously, it's those clinical experiences that translate into being a really great leader of a company. It's all those lessons we learned about leadership unknowingly, in our training. So, for me, I started out on the trauma service, right? And whenever there's a blunt trauma, there's like a whole team that comes in, but that team is hugely diverse. So, the thoracic team goes down to the trauma bay. The orthopedic guys are there for the fractures. You've got neurosurgery there for the brain, the brain bleed, and and on and on and on. And you're thrown into this trauma pit, and now you've got to function as a team with one goal to do one thing, and that is save a life. So you have to learn very, very quickly how to assemble a team who maybe has, 10 different goals on that patient to coalesce into a positive outcome, which is exactly what we do when we build our companies. I always like to say that, like, in an operating room, we never have what we call B gamers, right? We always have A gamers. And these are people that bring their A game, not their A minus game, not their B plus game, but every day come in to work, do your best, and you'll have a positive outcome. Because again, at Cortex, and I'm sure, like your companies, the way we treat the company is the way we treat the patient. Every day, the only thing that matters is the survival and improvement in that company, just like a patient. When you're in an operating room, the only person, I don't matter, the scrub nurse doesn't matter, with all due respect, my assisting colleague across the table, anesthesia, the most important person in an operating room is the patient, right? And we make decisions that are important to the patient. Well, you do the same thing with a business. Your business is your patient. You make tough decisions. Everybody on this call has made some difficult decisions, but you've done it with a team around you that you built, and you've done it for the sole benefit of the company. And it may not have been something that benefits, you, James, or you, David, but it was something that you did for the company. So I really see those things as interconnected. The ability to lead a team as a clinician, on your first night of call, and the ability to create that same presence within your company.
Yeah, I mean, what you're really talking about is culture, right, Kathy? And
Yeah.
aligning people around that unified mission. And I love the analogy of treating your company like a patient. I think that's a
Yeah.
great lesson for folks. David, you've been in a lot of boardrooms. What was it like being a doctor in the boardroom? And what did you do? Do you have to do anything to maintain your credibility? Was there a special skill that you feel like you needed to have to translate your clinical needs into the business needs? And how did that happen at a very senior level?
Well, I've had board meetings in various venues. I had my last company, our lead investor was NEA, board meetings on Sand Hill Road. Our lead investor now is Coastal Ventures. They're on Sand Hill Road, but we don't meet there. We meet at AliveCore. And so I would tell you that from the beginning, my credibility rested on, is this a good product? Does it do what I say? Does it create value? Can it be sold for a profit, to speak to James? Does it make a business? And so I don't think I was ever questioned, because again, I don't sit there and say, well, I think we need a better 401k. Again, I'm back at let the anesthesiologist put the patient to sleep and maintain their status during the surgery, and let the recovery team do their thing, and let Kathy do her thing. Change that heart out, change those lungs out, hook up that LVAD, and everybody. There's no I in team, and that's true in a boardroom. It's true in a company. It's true in almost everything in life. So I would tell you that from my perspective, I know when I'm in a board meeting, and on my board, speaking of cardiovascular surgeons, Toby Cosgrove is on my board.
Oh, I like.
And so, they look to us when there's a clinical question. And that's hopefully when we will give our expertise. They don't look to us when they say, show me your pro forma financials. That's look to somebody else. So again, everybody has their role to play. It needs to operate, as Kathy said, as a team. That means there's a leader, there's the CEO, and that CEO has to manage that team to make them produce their A game.
So
I'm stealing from you, Kathy. I'm sorry.
yeah, no. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
I was just going to say I'm flattered. There you go. So
there you go.
So
I'm
Jim,
jealous you have Toby on your board. I'll just be honest. I may try to steal him.
Yeah, Jim, let's peel back the onion on what David said a little bit more, and coming out of academia especially. Did you feel like you had to learn a new language and the language of business, right? Like when I was working in my medical business, I had to learn what a myocardial infarction was, right? So it's like I had to learn a language of clinical medicine. Did you feel like you had to do the same thing in the boardroom for your investors and everybody that you were working with? And was it revenue and EBITDA and cash flow and words like that? I mean, how did you have to like upskill yourself on the business side?
Yeah, there was a steep learning. There's still a steep learning curve. Like, we had one investor, this our most recent investor, and took me aside. He said, for the product, you know it better than anybody else in the world. Everything else you're doing for the first time, and that's true. Like, so there was a very, very steep learning curve to understand finances, data-driven sales, commercial operations, marketing. Like, how do you get quantitative marketing metrics? How do you create a brand? How do you do this and that? And then it's just a lot. And you can definitely hire the people around you, and those people are experts at what they do. And sort of the OR analogy, like I think of it in a sports analogy, like being an academic physician in many ways is like playing singles tennis. And I think running a company is like playing team hockey. Everybody's got to know what everybody's doing and what they're going to be doing in about 2 or 3 seconds, and just totally seamlessly interactive. But each one of those role players has a different role. I have a different role, and we all play that role, but it's all got to somehow fit together. The transition, I think, Jamie, is around the product, because I think we were similar to many startups where we fell in love with the product, and we never really thought about the go-to-market strategy and how we're going to actually make a business out of this that would scale. I think that when in hindsight, I think the times that we found, early on that there wasn't a whole lot of interest. And then in hindsight, the reason I think that was because we never talked about a business. We talked about a product and we talked about a clinical need. Once we started talking about a business and thinking about like how we're going to actually commercialize this so that investors who are taking a chance on us, a big chance on us, can actually get the kind of ROI that they are looking for, then all of a sudden the language became easier to speak. But again, like I'm an academic physician and I never thought about money. I always just thought about the patient and how we treat that patient and didn't have anything to do with money. But the reality of it is like money is a reality and you've got to scale a business. Otherwise you will not survive as the business. And you can have the most naive and innocent, goals in the world, but your company will die and that product will never see light and patients will not be helped. So I think it marries the two, like, but there's definitely an evolution. I think there's also an evolution in the time of your startup, right? There's hey, we're 5 people against the world, and then all of a sudden you become 20, and all of a sudden you become 100, and all of a sudden you're 500, and each one of those stages is very different, and the needs of the business are very, very different. And you have to adapt to that as a team. And sometimes we have a board member that uses that British phrase, horses for the courses. There's some horses that are good for some courses, and there are other horses that doesn't mean that they're not a good horse. They're just not good for that course. And so I think you have to adapt as the company evolves and grows as well.
Yeah. And what honestly, what James just said is the whole reason why I went to school and got an MBA was because I wanted to learn the language of business. And I really think that, especially in medical school and medical programs coming up, I think it's really imperative that med students learn some aspects of business because, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, medicine is a business. It's right now a poorly run business, but it's a business nonetheless. And, for me, I was building a ventricular assist device program at Cedars-Sinai, and I didn't understand anything. I mean, I understood the clinical aspects, and companies like Thortec and at the time Novacor would come to me and ask me, oh, we've got this device. How does it fit in the chest? Where do you see the connections coming in? What's the anticoagulation protocol? But then they would fail to get that product to commercialization. And I realized, aha, there's another way that I could be helping these VAD companies to develop technology. But to do that, I needed to understand the language of business. So, kudos to you, James, for being able to do that because it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? I was, completely overwhelmed. I thought, oh, business school, how hard could it be, right? We did medical school. It's about 10 times harder, just so you know, than med school. So.
Just as a reminder for everyone, Tori, I see your question in the Q&A. Thank you for asking it. If you want to line up your questions, we're going to move to Q&A in just a little bit. But Kathy, let's again go a little bit deeper there. Doctor founders sometimes risk over-educating investors. When I was at Startup Health, we used to get some decks, and you'd get a deck from a physician, and there was a ton of clinical evidence in the deck, and it was like you almost lost the thread because there was so much evidence behind it that you're like, well, what's the mission of the business and how can we focus on simplifying the messaging so we really understand what's happening here? How do you strike the right depth? How do you train doctor mind to say, oh, you know what, I need to lay the hook first before we start layering in all of this amazing insight and information that I have?
Yeah, that's tricky, right? Especially, at Cordex, we raised all our own capital ourselves. We didn't use a placement agent or any outside help. So, I was what they called chief everything officer, CEO, and raised my own capital. And in order to do that, there's a couple things. First off, there has to be an authenticity to what you're talking about, right? And an authenticity with who you are as a clinician building this product and having, as James said, passion around, and David said the same thing, around believing that that product is essential to good clinical outcome. And then after that, it's really about telling your story. And in order to tell your story, what I think about, the way I think about doing it is if you treat your investors like you're speaking to a patient, right? You're going to couch that story in language you're going to understand. So if I just start hitting them with, endothelial function and, inflammation and heart disease and that type of thing, they're not going to get it. But if I talk to them about, you've got 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body, they're all coated with this beautiful single cell lining called the endothelium. Think about it like Teflon coating inside your arteries. And when that coating becomes inflamed, that's the earliest sign of the development of heart disease. They get it, right? They can picture Teflon coating inside an artery, and then they can picture heart disease. So being able to message them in a way you'd speak to a patient about a disease they had. We don't use medical jargon speaking to patients. We talk to them in a lay language. That's critical because, again, if they don't understand your message, you'll really strike out with raising capital. And I've seen that over and over and over again.
David, you've been through this multiple times. Has there been a consistent challenge at every one of your businesses that you're like, oh, you recognize it immediately, and you're like, yes, this is where we need to focus our time and attention right now. And if so, what was that?
Well, making money. Making money is always the challenge of a business, and that is getting somebody to part with the money. And in medicine, especially in classical fee-for-service medicine, it's getting a reimbursement, whether it's from Medicare or private payers. And that's a hurdle beyond the FDA that requires a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of investment and validation. And then you still have the insurers saying, well, that's an experimental. You may have, I have 250 peer-reviewed publications at AliveCore. I still have insurers saying, yeah. So you've proven it. If it's still experimental. Again, those are the barriers. How do you make money in medicine? Okay, selling a technology, selling software as a service, selling a new biometric. That's the biggest challenge. That's the Mount Everest. Taking cool science, cool technology, things that could really help patients, but now you got to get paid for them. And it's not as simple, we kind of bypassed a little bit of that at AliveCore. We went to people and said, pay for it yourself. Use your FSA money, use your credit card. I can proud to say, go into Walmart and buy it. And they can, but it has to be inexpensive enough for them to do that. So there are always challenges, always issues, and getting paid for what you're offering is the biggest and oftentimes the most important one. Not giving away that pair of socks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're going to go to an audience question now from Tori Kuana. As a longtime industry veteran in the CV space, I've seen many physician-led innovative ideas that fail to reach commercialization or market adoption. There are many aspiring doctor-preneurs who are insanely bright, but also notoriously confident in their own perspective, but rarely understand the operational or workflow pain points outside of their own ecosystem. In your own journey from physician to successful innovator, how did you overcome the challenge of translating a personal insight into a scalable solution with true market value? Jim, maybe you take that one first.
All right, I'll try. Like that one's a good question. It's loaded with a bunch of different insights, I think. I mean, let me just try to take it in order. So physician-led innovative ideas that failed to reach commercialization or market adoption, that's common, right? More than 90% of startups will fail. By the time you hit Series C financing, I think you've got a 50% chance of making it. Aspiring doctors who are insanely bright but notoriously confident in their own perspective. Yeah, that I think is the lack of understanding of like the multifaceted, multivariable process that it takes to actually scale it, to develop and scale a business. And that business comes with a bunch of different things that Dave just alluded to. Like, when I was in academics, advocacy and market access and reimbursement and coverage were particularly uninteresting topics.
Yeah.
When it's existential to the life of your business, it becomes extremely interesting to figure out how to get reimbursed and covered by commercial and Medicare payers. how did you overcome the challenge of translating a personal insight to a scalable solution? I think again, it's just this multifaceted thing where, when you come out, you don't know anything about FDA regulatory clearance versus CE mark, or you don't know anything about cybersecurity and what kind of certifications you need there. You don't know anything about sort of infrastructure of cloud-based stuff. And hey, in one country, you can't let the data leave, in another country you can, and so on and so on. There's just so many things to learn. I don't know. I think that it goes again to the North Star. If you can figure out the North Star and surround yourself with an amazing team, you'll figure it out. But the one thing that I'd leave you with is that when you have an amazing idea, I think the most important questions to ask is, like, to David's point, like, who's going to buy this and why? Like, who's the economic buyer? And the economic buyer is not necessarily the customer or the end user, right? Because as doctors, we've sort of relinquished that control to a lot of financial folks. And so while we might want something, the economic buyer may not be the physician. And then if the economic buyer is or is not the physician, the question is, why would they pay you money to buy your stuff? And there has to be some value creation there, right? There has to be a clinical value. Maybe it's a reduction of waste. Maybe it's an improvement of outcomes. But there's got to be that's an investment that they're putting money into to try to overall improve the overall health. And that I think is sort of the hardest thing to crack, right? Like, where are all of the different opinions and different stakeholders coming into play, and where does the economic buyer and the customer and clinical care merge to make the pie bigger for everyone?
Yeah, you're almost having to pull together, hey, if the end user is not the payer, we might be doing it because we're solving for clinical solution A, but they're going to do it because they're solving for operational solution Y. And your ROI is much more multifaceted than just a clinical outcome. It's a labor cost savings, it's an efficiencies, boost, or something like that. So that's a very, very interesting insight. Kathy, there's a second part to this question, which is, what advice would you give to other physicians who are solving their own needs but haven't yet done the broad market or systems level analysis that truly drives adoption or sustained impact? How do you see a problem in front of you and then translate that into what is a broader market need?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, that's tricky, and it really goes to the heart of, adoption and understanding innately why clinicians will adopt technology, right? So, to me, it's a couple of things. Number one is understanding what drives adoption on a clinical level. Part of that is data, right? So, number one, whatever you're doing really needs to have good science around it. And I know we've talked about that quite a bit on this webinar, right? Number two, it has to have a pretty simple learning curve, right? Because if you give me a technology that has a steep learning curve that I have to have, expertise and specialized training, that is a much, much more difficult adoption technique, right, for clinicians. Next, it has to fit in our workflow, right? So if you give me a technology that wreaks havoc in my workflow, I tend not to adopt it. I'll get it and it'll just sit on the shelf. So again, especially for Cordex, we actually measure a whole suite of cardiovascular metrics in addition to measuring this metric of vascular health, because we basically want to replace what we call dumb cuffs that just measure blood pressure, with my technology being a smart cuff. And we made it portable. Why? Because once you start moving clinicians out of or patients out of exam rooms for tests, it wreaks havoc on our workflow. So, little things like that you have to think about, in adoption. And lastly, the sort of dirty little secret that no one wants to talk about is, can I make money? Can I make money on it? So again, it has to have good science. It's got to have fit in my workflow. It's got to be easy for me to implement and learn. But lastly, the question, and I think David sort of alluded to this a bit, is, can I make money with this technology? Are there CPT billing codes? Is there a business plan in which I'm going to add top line revenue? Because you're talking about clinicians who are really hurting right now in terms of reimbursement. And so, again, just speaking to my technology, we have no intention of selling devices, right? Because that's a terrible business cycle. It's not what we call a recurring revenue cycle, which is critical to your business model. So, our idea is to actually put these devices for free in clinicians' offices and sell them the test. And that's called a click charge revenue model, like a Schick razor blade model, where I, give you the the razor and then sell you the razor blade, right? And so, but it's a shared revenue model in which the physician makes money with each test and Cortex makes money for each test. And that gives us margins on the order of software, because every time my cuff inflates, Cortex gets money and the clinician gets money as well. And so again, those 4 adoption principles are really critical to you developing your technology and getting it adopted in the workplace.
Again, if other folks have questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A. You guys, we're all kind of dancing around this concept of like impact and ROI now. And so I want to go just a little bit deeper into it. And maybe David, we'll start with you. Is there a metric beyond ROI that best captures your solution's true human impact? Like, how are you measuring that
Peace of
impact?
mind. We spend 30 minutes a year in front of our doctor. I'm a patient with paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. So most of the time, I'm not going to be near a healthcare provider. I'm not going to be in a healthcare organization. And I can have my problem, which potentially can cause a stroke, heart failure, all kinds of issues, anytime. And by the way, when we get to be a certain age, we get extra systoles, we get PVCs, PACs. Am I back in AFib? Do I need to go to the emergency room? Do I need to call my doctor? No, I don't. I use my Cardia or I use my Apple Watch. I'm in sinus rhythm. I just had a PVC. It's fine. That's peace of mind. I've heard that literally tens of thousands of times. And so that's not an economic metric, but it's certainly a very human metric and one we take very seriously. And
Jim,
by
how
the way,
about
to the previous question, I'm often wrong. I'm just never in doubt.
I
I
love
think
that.
that's a fairly common physician orientation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jim, what about for you, and for Cleerly, like what's that metric beyond just financial ROI that best captures your solution's impact?
Yeah, I mean, our North Star is that we believe that we should be screening the world for heart disease.
Mhm.
We look at the most successful preventive care paradigms in medicine, and they include mammography, colonoscopy, lung CTs, pap smears. If you
Yep.
think about the commonality between all of those things, they use some form of imaging to directly visualize disease at the individual level. We understand the vascular biology. We have extremely safe, non-invasive imaging tools. 60% of the people who are going to die from a heart attack don't have any symptoms before their event. We can have the best preventive programs in the hospitals. We will never make a dent into this technology, into this public health epidemic, because people are dying in the home. So
Yeah.
our North Star, our ROI, whatever metric you want to use, is, the North Star is universal recommendations for worldwide screening.
Yeah.
And no heart
We have
attacks.
another,
No heart
yeah, we have
attacks.
another question
We
from
know
the
that we
audience
can prevent
here.
90% of heart attacks. We just need to identify the
Yeah.
people before they have them.
You're
Well, just
speaking
one
my
more step on
language,
this.
James. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kathy, just
Mine
one more
too.
step on this, right? So
Yeah.
how much disease is really sitting in EMRs right now that's just being unaddressed, right? Like one of the big
Yeah.
problems in healthcare today is we have all this data, and it's so hard to take that data, turn it into an insight, and have that insight drive a behavior change or an action. Like, Kathy, what do
Right.
you think is the solution to that?
Yeah, again, I just I have to, sort of tag on to what James said. I think it's all about prevention and wellness. I mean, it really should be shocking to everyone on this call that, heart disease, as we know, is the #1 killer of men and women in the world. Okay. But it's 80% preventable. And I can tell you, I operate on people all day long that have a normal cholesterol, they have a normal, hemoglobin A1C, these, I think you called it earlier, James, proxy measurements for vascular health. And what we're missing is a direct validated metric of vascular health, whether that's imaging in James' case or, a point of care non-invasive test. I mean, my vision, James, is you do my test first. I get to go first. And then I refer them all to you, for in-depth imaging of inflammation in the coronary arteries, And so again, like back to that North Star question, for me, it's about prevention and wellness. My whole motivation for becoming the CEO and founding this company is really to, like all of us, save lives. it gets pretty frustrating as a heart surgeon, especially as a transplant surgeon, where, I'm the one that gets to chop out the human heart and throw it in a bucket when it's decimated with heart disease, and we got to, change it out and give you a new one. So who better to talk to you about prevention than somebody who, and I know this is a terrible way to say it, cuts up more people than than a serial killer. Who better to teach you about prevention and wellness? Because we have to do a better job in cardiovascular disease. It's again preventable. So why is it still our number one killer? And I think AHA has done a lot to kind of push that science
Absolutely.
forward.
But in terms of like that, it's a great answer. David, from a feedback loop standpoint, right? Like we're trying to have behavior change and behavior modification and turn healthcare into a lifestyle, right? Like that's what really needs to
Right.
happen. Like, how do you view your solution as a way of doing that, right? We're walking around with a 12 lead in your pocket.
Well, if you just are more aware, then you're empowered. Empowered patients will be more compliant. More compliant patients will take their rosuvastatin, their PCSK9, will lower their cardiovascular risk, will decrease, they'll take their GLP-1s and manage their way through the issues you get with GLP-1s, and they'll reduce their inflammation. And the outcome will be they'll have a longer, better life. They'll not only put, years in their life, they'll put life in their years. And that, but the hardest thing to change is lifestyle. And so,
Yeah.
we all of us have to work harder. And by the way, prevention doesn't doesn't make Cedars-Sinai or UCLA or New York Presbyterian any money. They don't make any money by preventing. And so our system is not today designed for optimizing prevention, but it needs to be.
Right. There's the crux of it. The fact that our primary care doctors are some of the lowest paid in the system, yet they're the quarterback of the patient's care, like a real problem there. Another question from the audience. We have 4 minutes left, so we'll try and move through these. They just came in at the last second here. Question from Kevin Malloy. Do you think it's easier to invest in others via funds like Scrub Capital or Clinicians who VC than to be a founder yourself? Seems like you get upside and you get to make a difference, but maybe not as much scale of profits as having your own company. I struggle with time commitment needed to have my own startup versus just funding others. Maybe Kathy, start with you on that one.
Oh my gosh, Kevin, great question. I have to tell you, being the CEO of your own company is a blast. I can't, I wouldn't trade that for anything. Yes, I'd love to maybe later on be a CMO at a different company. But I love what I'm doing because it is so creative. And the other thing is taking ownership of what you're doing every single day is so important to me. And, think about it again, from my standpoint, we can operate on like one or two patients a day, but imagine being able to help thousands of patients every day through the technology you're developing. There is no better altruistic feeling than being able to do that. And so I would say that my preference, at least, would be to be heading a company rather than working inside of a larger organization. I also think that startups are lean and mean, and I think again that just really resonates with me personally.
Yeah, so this concept of being able to live your mission every day as opposed to invest in others' missions and support
Yeah,
them.
but thanks for
Uh,
the question, Kevin.
yeah, Jim,
But you
what
got to
about?
have a mission. You got to have a mission first. I
Yeah.
mean, diversifying my portfolio means I put some money into various things. Uh, if you have a mission, you have to be the one carrying the ball because there may not be anybody else. Jim may not have anybody else who had shared his mission.
So we're gonna go into the last audience question here really quickly. Dr. Kathy, could you expand on telling us about why selling devices makes for a bad economic model? It seems to be
Oh,
nearly ubiquitous devices where adoption, if successful, would unlock a huge market.
yeah, no. So again, if I sell you so like, if this is, oh, you can't see it because of the thing, but if I sell you a device, right? The problem is the sales cycle. So if I sell you a device, and again, my device is based on the platform of an automated blood pressure cuff, the average life expectancy of an ordinary blood pressure cuff is 7 to 9 years. So I need to wait for that device to break before I sell you another one. And again, that is not a good sales cycle because again, the revenue model doesn't work. But if I give you a technology that has a recurring revenue model where every time you do a test, the company is making money. And by the way, the clinician is also making money. We can actually add several hundreds of thousands of dollars of top line revenue to a clinical practice by using this particular model in which we share revenue between the company and the physician. We're not giving away socks, David, just so you know, but it's got a similar theme to it. And on average, the average primary care doc in the United States makes about $174,000 a year, which is, again, not a lot, and that number is going down. So being able to literally monetize a blood pressure cuff, a tool that they're going to use, again, every day on every patient. And by the way, a tool that their med tech person or whoever's taking their vital signs is actually going to be using. The doctor isn't even going to be doing our test, but being able to add that top line revenue on a recurring revenue basis is critical. And any investors out there that may be listening, they understand the concept of not selling devices, but selling tests as really more of a SaaS platform.
Amazon Prime, Netflix, your cell phone.
Yep. All recurring.
Yeah, the one thing that I would just add to that, right, is it's not about the device, it's about what the device enables, right? And the care that it can actually facilitate. And that's what you're really selling. The device is the facilitator of that. Jim, why don't you bring us home with the last audience question here, and then we'll close up. What was the first product you truly fell in love with during your journey? And have there been any ideas or products you were passionate about that, despite your enthusiasm, couldn't come to fruition? Like, was there a product you're like, oh, or a solution you said, I really love this, but couldn't make it happen?
That's a good question. Well, my own company's products aside, I think the one that I fell in love with was the LiveCore. I mean, that came out so early and it was so ahead of the game. And it was so innovative and it was so, forward thinking. So
Flattery will get
and
you everywhere, Jim.
yeah, but I mean, your business evolved, right? You went direct to patient and then now you're converting over into a fee for service model. You've got plenty of ways to go into the value-based care model. So there's like tons of different ways, but the reason I think you can do that is because you offer clinical value. So the ones that didn't make it, the one I was worried about, I think was 1999, I think they started the company for left atrial appendage occluder devices. They didn't see FDA clearance until 2017, but now you're seeing exponential growth in left atrial appendage occlusion. So it's, that's a long haul, right? Going 18 years before FDA clearance. And so you had to have a lot of tenacity there, but that one actually got there. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that, was so great that didn't get there. But I think what they did with Watchman was, the founders of that company were definitely forward thinking.
Okay, we're going to do a quick just lightning round. We're going to go around and do this just 2 questions really quickly. We're going to go James, Kathy, David. Most overrated buzzword in digital health 2025 edition.
AI.
Disruptive technology.
You stole my answer. Disruption. But I will reemphasize it, disruption.
Thank you.
And in one word, the future of healthcare is, Jim?
AI.
Cardiometabolic health.
David?
AI for cardiometabolic health.
I love that. A blending of everything, showing the collaboration on this call. All right, folks, that's a wrap on our whirlwind cardiac tour of clinical-led innovation. A huge thanks to Doctors Min, Albert, and Magliato for proving that while white coats pair nicely with a pitch deck, they're sharing their stories here and their missions with all of us today. We really appreciate it. The replay will be on the American Heart Association YouTube channel, so check it out there if you need an encore. And you can engage with everyone on this call on LinkedIn and social media platforms and the HA on social. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you guys for sharing your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Jimmy.
you.
Thank you.